Should you practice Spanish with your relatives? Here we are, just a few weeks away from the holiday season, and if you have Spanish speakers in your life that you know you'll be interacting with over the holidays, you probably already have some stress associated with that. Memories of trying to communicate in Spanish, being bold enough to speak up and form a few sentences in a very slow and methodical but choppy way, only to be overwhelmed when the other person responds at what seems like 100 miles per hour. Students who have completed the Spanish in 1 Month challenge and our other free materials are in a pretty good position for beginning to think in Spanish with foundational communication skills. But that's not everything. If you're now at that intermediate level, you can probably piece together sentences that Spanish speakers understand completely, but you have trouble understanding the responses. Real-life contexts are much more overwhelming than the individual sentences you've practiced saying while in the course. Unless it's very elementary Spanish in short sentences, you can get lost really easily. And if you do understand what the other person says, you then get overwhelmed when responding. When you were studying Spanish, you could slowly write sentences out one word at a time. Now it's different. You have to try to come up with everything instantaneously, remembering verb forms and vocabulary at a faster pace than ever if you want to keep up at all. And if you're like most Spanish learners, all of this stress is so discouraging that you're likely to give up and just switch back into English, telling yourself that next year is when your Spanish will finally be good enough. Of course, there is hope. If you start now, you can practice a bit in order to get better before the holidays. But what's the best way to practice? Conventional wisdom says that immersion is the only way to become fluent, so if you want to be more fluent in Spanish by the time the holidays are here, you should start practicing with your relatives as soon as possible, right? If you felt a jolt of stress just thinking about that idea, don't worry, that's not what I'm going to recommend. Don't get me wrong, practicing with native speakers is essential for getting to the fluency that you want. And since your goal is to be able to improve your Spanish conversation by the time the holidays roll around this year, there's no getting around the fact that you need to practice speaking. But maybe practicing speaking isn't exactly what you think. In this video, I'll show you the right way to practice speaking Spanish between now and the holidays. We'll go over who are the right people to practice with to build your Spanish skills and confidence so that you can talk with your Spanish-speaking relatives comfortably. And at the end of the video, I'll give away a bunch of previously unreleased resources that will help quickly build your confidence in Spanish, and I'll also announce a contest to give away a month of Spanish conversation coaching to one of you who follows the guidelines laid out in this video. One way or another, in this video, let's put you on a path to having the best holidays you've ever had when it comes to communicating in Spanish with your loved ones. If you followed the advice in the previous video, you're now learning at least one new word or phrase every day in Spanish, specifically the vocabulary that you actually use on a daily basis. If you haven't watched that video yet, I recommend going through it now. We covered the first of our 3 rules for preparing to speak Spanish over the holidays this weekend. Today, we'll cover rule number 2, which is the most important one. And don't worry, the rule is not to start having as many Spanish conversations as you can, at least not yet. There's this idea that immersing yourself in conversation is the only way to learn a language, and immersion can be a great way to become fluent, but it isn't the first step. It's more like the last step. Just like if you're learning how to swim, the first step is not jumping into the middle of the Pacific Ocean. If you've taken the Spanish in 1 Month challenge or used the free accelerated Spanish materials, you've laid a good foundation for yourself. You've learned enough essential Spanish to express your thoughts pretty well, but slowly. And your listening comprehension probably needs a lot of work, but at least you're picking up on a lot of the fabric of the language as you hear native speakers talk. Now it's time to turn all of this knowledge into speaking Spanish. So rule number 2 is speak Spanish out loud every day. That's it in a nutshell. But of course, the way that you speak Spanish out loud will make a huge difference for how well you learn. So in this video, I'll give you 3 tips for practicing speaking Spanish out loud in a way that will actually turn into fluency with communicating with your loved ones in Spanish. But if you remember nothing else from this video, remember that the most important thing is to speak out loud. Why is that? Learning Spanish isn't just about knowledge. It's kind of like swimming. You can't expect to be great at swimming if you've read about it and memorized the names of all the important movements. Until your muscles actually get some experience doing those movements, you're not really proficient, no matter how much you know. If your goal is to be able to be face to face with a Spanish speaker and confidently open your mouth and speak Spanish, you need to practice that ahead of time. Speaking out loud, spontaneously, face to face, takes an enormous amount of confidence, and if you're like most people, you first need to be in the habit of speaking Spanish unhesitatingly for quite a while before you're at that point. So the priority of speaking out loud as much as possible is crucial for bridging the gap between merely studying Spanish and actually using Spanish unhesitatingly in conversation. So let's go over my 3 tips for making the most of this rule between now and the holidays. I'll summarize them here to get started, and then I'll share the details, along with some really exciting stuff that we're giving away for the first time ever. So here are those 3 tips. Tip number 1 is to practice vocabulary that you'll really use out loud in context. Tip number 2 is to practice a variety of sentence structures out loud at random. Tip number 3 is to practice face-to-face with someone who can work with you at your own comfort level. Let's talk about how to do each of these between now and the end of the year. So tip number 1 is to practice vocabulary that you'll really use out loud and in context. Remember the vocabulary exercises that we talked about in the previous video. You should be accumulating a little bit of new vocabulary every day, specifically vocabulary that's going to help you in your conversations this holiday season. Speaking this vocabulary out loud makes all the difference in the world for getting better at it without feeling awkward. Let's say that you recently learned the phrase for wrapping gifts, which is envolver los regalos. You're getting it right when you're using your flashcards, but you've never said that phrase out loud in a sentence context. What's going to happen at the holidays when you try to slip this into a conversation? You'll probably be excited that you can now use this new phrase that you learned, but it's also going to be awkward because your mouth will be very new to saying the phrase. To fix this, the most important thing is to practice speaking, so that when you talk, it flows out naturally and you don't have to think too much about the individual words. If you start speaking Spanish out loud every day, even just a little bit, you'll be on the right path. And if you're like hundreds of our students, you can be ready to turn that into practice with your relatives or in-laws in a couple of months. Tip 2 is to practice a variety of grammar at random out loud. This probably sounds odd, but it actually turns out to be one of the most important missing pieces for almost every Spanish learner that we've worked with in our coaching. It's one thing to know a bunch of words and phrases, it's another to be able to stitch them together fluidly on the fly, no matter whether you're conversing in the present tense, the future tense, using usted, or anything else. Now, I know you might be intimidated by this tip, but it's really not as hard as it sounds. Using Spanish audio quizzes that are heavily grammar-focused, you can simulate what it's like to have to come up with Spanish sentence structures on the fly in real life. And if you use them out loud, it's the next best possible thing to actual conversation practice. So to help you with this second tip, here's one of the exciting announcements that I promised you. For the first time ever, we're going to let you access a vault of previously unreleased resources for audio quizzing. This is an ever-growing collection of audio quizzes that will help you practice your essential grammar and syntax. You can access it at the link below this video that says Audio Quiz Vault. When you go there, you'll see that there are 2 levels to choose from. The Volume 1 level is for anyone who's completed Volume 1 of Accelerated Spanish or gone through the Spanish in 1 Month challenge. The Volume 2 audio quizzes are for those of you who have gotten through Lesson 12 of Accelerated Spanish. Either way, you can download these audio quizzes to your device and shuffle them. In each case, you'll hear a very random, often grammatically complex English sentence, and your task is to guess the Spanish version of that sentence, and, most importantly, speak that Spanish sentence out loud. To get even more out of this, I recommend combining these audio quizzes with the tips that we shared in the previous video. Once in a while, as you go through your audio quizzes, pull up random vocabulary words that you've been collecting in your daily life. Pause the audio quiz and see if you can find a way to work that word or phrase into the audio quiz that you're listening to. For example, if you're on an audio quiz example that says, ella no tenía nada más, and the vocabulary term that you pulled up was envolver los regalos, you might come up with, ella no envolvía los regalos con nadie más. Use your imagination and, most importantly, say the new sentence that you came up with out loud. This is tricky, but if you practice it now, you'll be making new neural connections between your vocabulary and all kinds of sentence structures, exploring among the infinite possible combinations, just like in real Spanish conversation. A couple of months of this will do wonders for your Spanish conversation abilities by the end of the year. But even if you don't take it this far, what's important right now is to speak out loud every day between now and the holidays using the audio quizzes if you can. And I recommend starting right now with a commitment to speak a little bit of Spanish out loud every day for the next few days. At the end of the video, I'll show you how to participate in a Speaking Every Day challenge that we're doing. Basically, if you pledge to do some speaking out loud in Spanish for 5 days in a row, you can be entered to win free coaching with us. More details later in the video. And that brings us to tip number 3, which is where we tie it all together. Tip number 3 is to practice face-to-face with someone who can work with you at your own comfort level. Because yes, practicing Spanish out loud on your own is essential, but you also can't get away with just doing that. As you've probably experienced, it's an enormous jump from studying and practicing Spanish on your own to jumping into conversations with native speakers. It would be a lot easier if they would just slow down for you, simplify their vocabulary, and try to meet you halfway. But of course, that's a lot to ask of them. Plus, probably the people in your life can't possibly know exactly what your own specific knowledge of Spanish is. If they're trying to have a chill family holiday together, do you really think they want to spend 90% of their mental effort trying to remember exactly what vocabulary you'll understand as they talk? The best way to practice anything is at the edges of your comfort zone. There's basically no benefit to jumping so far outside of your comfort zone that you get discouraged. But of course, it's also not helpful to practice things that you already know without ever challenging yourself. The best conversation practice in Spanish is right at the edges of your current capabilities. And if you can get that kind of conversation practice in Spanish multiple times a week between now and the end of the year, imagine how much you'll improve. So the obvious question is, who should teach you Spanish? And when is the right time to practice Spanish with the Spanish speakers who are close to you versus somebody else? And what I recommend is not to practice with your relatives yet, but instead to get a good Spanish coach who can get to know you and your capabilities well. The reason coaching is better than practicing with your relatives is that a coach is 100% focused on getting you from where you are to where you need to be. If you get coaching from our team at Accelerated Spanish, for example, your coach will carefully assess where you currently are in your Spanish, then determine where you can realistically be by the end of the year, and come up with a plan for getting there, step by step, week by week. We all want to talk with the native speakers in our life without having to worry about if we're trying their patience. But a Spanish coach's whole job is to be patient with you, to guide you at your own pace, not expecting you to be any further along than you realistically should be at any given time, but also keeping you headed in the right direction and at the right pace. We've linked our coaching options in the description of this video, and they all have a satisfaction guarantee. But of course, what's even better than paying for coaching is to win it for free, so let's talk about the giveaway. Here are the details on the challenge that we're doing. For the next 5 days, if you commit to speaking some Spanish out loud every day, below this video is a checklist that you can use to track your progress. The checklist and the challenge only last for 5 days, but if you can speak Spanish out loud for the next 5 days, imagine how much your Spanish can improve by the end of the year. Now, because we really want you to succeed at speaking Spanish more confidently this holiday season, I'm going to give you an extra incentive. If you do the 5-day challenge and complete this checklist, you'll be entered into a drawing to win a free month of coaching with us. It's pretty simple. Download the checklist that I've linked below this video, as well as the audio quiz vault that I've linked. Use at least some of the audio quizzes out loud each day and check off that you did it that day. Then on Monday, take a picture of your checklist and email it to me to be entered in the drawing. Then let me explain what you can win by participating. This is a coaching offering that will have you working with native speakers on a daily basis to hone your Spanish between now and the holidays, focusing on exactly what you need to do every day. If you join this coaching, we'll start by evaluating exactly what your current level of Spanish is, and then we'll come up with a protocol to follow between now and the holidays. It'll include materials that we'll create specifically for the things that you want to be able to talk about with your Spanish-speaking loved ones. You'll get daily corrections on all of your work, whether spoken or written, with tips on what to do to improve. Not only that, but we'll get you on our coaching schedule, along with a small group of students at your level, to practice with a native speaking coach multiple times a week. That way you can experience lots of face-to-face practice at a level that's comfortable to you, getting you to exactly where you need to be by the holidays, step by step. If the idea of Spanish coaching makes you nervous, or if you're worried about the time commitment, keep in mind that this is a specific offering that we allow you to complete at your own pace. Plus, of course, if you win the giveaway, you're going to get it for free, so there's no reason not to participate. Download the checklist and the audio quizzes, start speaking Spanish out loud on a daily basis, and best of luck in the giveaway. Meanwhile, stay tuned for the third video where I'll release rule number 3 for honing your Spanish between now and the holidays.